What's your carnal theory?
Hey there, you're listening to Carnal Theory, where we talk with experts from around the world to learn how taking command of our sexual story affects our personal wellness, sexual experiences, and relationships with ourselves and others. Hi everyone, I'm Abba.
And I'm Amanda. Today on Carnal Theory, we're sitting down with Jessica Graham of Wild Awakening. Jessica is a meditation teacher, sex, relationship, and spiritual guide for couples and for individuals, a grief and trauma resolution guide, an international speaker, and the author of Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We are thrilled to chat with you. So, Jessica, you have brought a carnal theory for us to consider that I am really excited to dive into. And as some context for our new listeners, we at least focus part of our show around a carnal theory that our guest brings for our consideration. And the theory, it's meant to challenge a presumption or perception that we might have regarding our monthly theme or what our conversation will be based around. And this month we are exploring ethical non-monogamy, which we will touch into throughout our conversation and also see where else Jessica's theory leads us to exploring. We will also end the episode revisiting Jessica's theory just to see if maybe during the course of this conversation even your perceptions or presumptions may have shifted. So Jessica, if you would please share with us what you've brought for us to kick off with.
Absolutely. Sexuality, much like spirituality, is an infinite path of possibilities. When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting.
When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting. That's can we start with what a separate solid self, what you are exploring when you bring that up?
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, most of the time, are walking around in what philosopher Thomas Metzinger calls a ego tunnel. So we're inside this transparent tunnel of our emotions and our mental activity. And we believe that that's what we are. And we live our life based on our thoughts and our emotions being the end all and the be all, being the truth. And with that, we are contracted down to how we perceive that experience of self. It's me, it's this body, it's this shape and this size and these beliefs and this history and this, these opinions. And that's actually just such a tiny part of what we actually are. And so through spiritual development, through consciousness exploring, we start to see that, oh, actually this transparent tunnel is just that. It's just this tunnel that I've been in since the time I started to identify with myself as solid and separate from everything else. And that's the beginning of the awakening, where we start to see, oh, maybe the fact that I can witness these emotions and these thoughts, maybe there's something more. Maybe I'm bigger than that. And then it goes all the way to, infinite spacious awareness and total unity and love, consciousness, and all of this. We can keep going. But the first step is to just realize that I am not my mind. I'm not my body. They are important aspects of how I show up, the activity of this human being, but it's not all that I am. I'm actually limitless.
Well, this has been a great episode. Thank you all for tuning in. We've just solved something. I'm not even sure what, but I need to go figure it out.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's really profound.
maybe we can just unpack that for another few minutes.
Sure.
If anybody who's listening is in the same wavelength that I am, I feel like I need that. So, okay. So we are limitless. What, in having that understanding or belief, maybe it's not a belief, maybe that's a stretch, and having that awareness and having that perception.
Sure.
What do we gain from that?
Well, you actually
other
lose
than
out.
Fear, because I'm scared shitless right now.
Well, they say the cost of awakening is just everything.
Cool.
And that's been my experience. It continues to be my experience. So it's, in some ways, it's about what you lose. When we talk about a separate solid self, that's where suffering occurs. When I believe that what my partner said to me yesterday is that hurt my feelings is true, and I'm right and he's wrong, and I need to convince, and I need to get him to believe what I'm saying, like, that's suffering. Whereas if I'm like, oh, that's what's arising, and here's what's arising inside of me in this body, and maybe there's this aspect of it that I want to bring up into a conversation, and a lot of it is just activity, right? The suffering level goes down. Same thing. I live with chronic pain and chronic illness. The emotional and mental aspects of that are what cause the suffering, not the sensations in my body. Yeah, they can be painful, but it's the way that I think about them and what I emotionally experience around them. And so, while you may lose a lot, while you may lose the things that got you high, or the ideas of who you are, and like, this is me and I believe this, that can feel really good for a human. Like, I stand for this, I am this way, right? You may lose the ability to really solidify around that. What you, I guess, gain is the ability to be with everything just as it is. And when you can be with everything just as it is, you actually can take more skillful action. I like to talk about this a lot in terms of activism, right? Like, if I'm like solidified around, you're bad and you're wrong and what you're doing is awful, which it may be I may believe all of those things, but if that's the perspective and the place that I'm coming from, this contracted kind of like you and me, self and other kind of thing, it's so much harder to take skillful action, actually. It's so much harder to create positive change. And so letting go of being separate and solid, letting go of belief and opinion, doesn't mean that you aren't out there in the world making powerful moves of love that sometimes are quite fierce. And it doesn't mean that you never have an argument with your partner. It's like, no, but it's about where am I coming from? Am I coming from this contracted, separate place? Or am I on some level awake to the fact that there's absolutely no separation, that you and the three of us are just one beautiful mystery? There's no separation here, really.
Letting go of belief and, sorry, Amanda, letting go of belief and opinion is, I think, personally different phrasing than I think I've heard maybe parts of this conversation, at least that I've ventured down before. Letting go of belief and opinion is maybe going back to the misphrasing that I gave, just potential misphrasing that I gave just earlier, is thinking of things as limitless, and also our connection to one another, as you were just saying, that we're all together. So those don't count as beliefs. Those are just truths then.
Amazing question. Nothing I say is true. I love that you named that. Nothing I say is true. I don't know what true is. I'm only speaking from what it seems to me and what I've learned from those who came before me on the spiritual path.
So outside of belief and opinions, then everything is just interpretation of our perceived reality. I feel like I'm just like stringing words together that like I feel like make sense and like sound like cool, but like I'm not actually sure if they're like doing any good to create like like to create further conversation and thoughts.
I love this conversation. I love everything that you're bringing to it. You've seen The Matrix, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, that's really that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. We have this experience of this is reality. And then we get unplugged. And for most people, that's a slow process. There might be moments where we're like, oh shit, things are really different than I thought. But in general, it tends to be a slow process. It doesn't tend to be a spontaneous awakening. And even when it is a spontaneous awakening, there is lots of refining of the human being that wants to happen. So just putting that out there, that it's not like, oh, I've had this realization and now I'm perfect. No, you're still a human. So in The Matrix, they get unplugged and it's like, wow, everything that I thought was real was not the case. That was a virtual reality. It's the same thing for us. We are living in a virtual reality of our thoughts and our emotions. And those thoughts and emotions are what form our opinions and our beliefs and our values. And they're shaped by culture. They're shaped by genetics. They're shaped by what we grew up in. I mean, we can look at what's happening in this country right now, like the people on different sides of, really important topics believe it is true. Now, I have opinions and I have views on like what I think is right. But at the end of the day, I recognize that my belief on an absolute level, my belief in those opinions and those views is no different from the person on the other side and their beliefs and their opinions. It all comes down to emotion and thought and conditioning. And so when you're free from that, and I'm 41 years old. I will be a totally different person when I'm 80 if I live that long. What I'm talking about right now, it'll be like, that was child's play. And so like, by no means am I, what's that?
Hopefully. Yeah.
Well, hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully, especially hopefully I live that long. But, so I'm not speaking from like, again, this isn't true. This is just what it seems. When we're free or relatively free from the idea that we are separate and solid, the world it opens up. Everything opens up into a whole new reality. And like, before we know it, we're like controlling physics. No, it's not like that, but like, it sort of feels like that.
I look over and bend the spoon.
Exactly.
I feel like I'm totally, or maybe I'm not, but I do feel like I really identify with the things that you're saying. And I fully believe that truth is kind of this subjective, like, reality that has been formed over the things that make us who we are, like what we read, the language we speak, the way we've been taught to use that language and things like that. And yeah, I think that from what I gather and what you're saying, it makes me think about, when you come into a conversation, let's say let's say an abortion debate with someone who believes that abortion is absolutely murder, and you don't, maybe, like me personally, I don't believe that. But like, if you both are like, I am right, I am like, what I believe is the right thing, and you have no idea what you're talking about, then you won't gain anything in that conversation. You won't be open-minded. You won't, you're so focused on your emotions in that moment that you can't step back and consider other perspectives or realities. Yeah. Is that kind of what, like, an example of what you are saying?
Absolutely. It's a great example. And the thing is like, I don't really want to be close friends with someone who believes abortion is murder. Like, that's not somebody like that I want as my buddy, but I can love that person. I can love that person in a, not so much in a personal sense, but in an absolute sense. And I can recognize that their truth is their truth. Right. So, and I do think that's powerful. And again, it doesn't mean that I condone their beliefs or their actions around their beliefs, but yeah, for sure. And I want to do something real quick, because I know we probably want to move on to like our topic, but I want to do something really quick. So is that all right? A little demo. So
let's do it.
Take a moment and bring your attention to something, maybe something in your body. So a sensation in your body. And tell me when you have some attention on sensation.
Okay.
Great. Now, how do you know you're aware of that sensation? Who's aware of it?
Should we answer?
Sure.
My instinct is to say that my body is aware of it, and then it's telling whatever me is.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm aware of it because I recognize it and I've been given words for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how are you aware of the self you just described? The me that the body's talking to, or the me that has those words to describe. How are you aware of that?
Because I can talk with myself in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then who's aware of that talking happening in your head?
Just that echo chamber space. Just me, like just me in my head.
Mm-hmm. And does that me in your head end each time that you step back and you're aware of the next layer? Like, here's the me that's aware of the voice in my head. Here's the me that's aware of the me that's aware of the voice in my head.
Mm.
Does that seem to have an ending point, like a landing place where like, oh, this is the real me that's aware of everything everywhere?
No. No, I can't grab it.
I'm not sure I'm not nuanced.
Well, it doesn't really even require nuance. It's actually a big, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually the answer. Like, I don't know. Like, and that's sort of a beginning point for some of what we're talking about here. There's a lot of other ways to get at it, but like to just notice that awareness doesn't really stop. The awareness that you had when you were 5, the awareness that you have now, the awareness you have when you go visit Paris, the awareness that you have when you're sitting on your couch, like it doesn't seem to have an end. And you can just keep stepping outside of it and finding like there's no landing point. There's no end.
Yeah, that's true. Like the absorption of experiences doesn't stop so long as I'm in my current perceived state, like alive. Yeah. Yeah. I can totally keep absorbing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of transition this to the second half of your theory, which is that when we're waking up to being more than just this separate solid self, we suffer less, which I feel like we kind of talked about and addressed. But you also have it, you also say, and that sex will get a lot more interesting. Can you kind of expand on what that means when you say it gets a lot more interesting? What is interesting?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes at a certain point, we sort of land on like, this is who I am sexually. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. These are the kind of people I'm attracted to or the genders I'm attracted to. This is my sexual identity. Mm-hmm. Right. No, not everybody. Some people are super flexible and fluid and constantly changing. But for the most part, people tend to kind of like land on this is my sexual identity. When we are not attached to being one separate solid thing, that opens up and therefore endless possibility for who we could be sexually and what that could look like opens up. Also, when there's less suffering associated with being a human, things like ethical non-monogamy become way more possible because we're not attached to the suffering self that's jealous or the suffering self that's like falling in love with someone else and trying to manage, schedules, right? Like we can move through all of that with less of a sense of I'm this separate self that's like struggling to get it right or to, not feel bad in one way or another, or not make someone else feel bad.
Within the context of what we talked about so far, like expansiveness and absorbing experiences and how like there's no kind of end to that potential plane, might something like ethical non-monogamy might expand our experiences or our awareness even more then? Like, could it be of benefit?
Yes, absolutely. I am not someone who's like, everyone should be non-monogamous. I think I've made clear that, like, in general, I don't tend to think in black and white terms. And so I don't think of it as like the right way.
Right.
In fact, there are some people who it's absolutely not the right way for one reason or another. But yeah, non-monogamy is a pretty radical spiritual path.
Radical spiritual path. Can you elaborate on what that means to you?
Okay, so for example, I've been non-monogamous my whole life. I wasn't always ethically non-monogamous, but I've always been some version of non-monogamous, and I've also been monogamous, but certainly for periods. But I tend to be non-monogamous. When I really decided to explore it in a super conscious, mindful, ethical way, it meant encountering jealousy in a really real way. And for me, that jealousy was associated with abandonment, and it was associated with neglect, and it was associated with trauma. And when I went into it in a way that was curious and accepting, like, oh, wow, this feeling of jealousy is like a crushing rocks inside my chest, or like my mind is just looping, or I'm just like seeing these horrible images of the worst case scenario, right? When I deconstructed those pieces using meditation and looked at them as like their own strands of experience, they ceased to be this tangled up knot, and they started to just be a flow of activity. A flow of that activity that actually flows into everything else. And so not only did that allow for some healing around the trauma and the neglect and the abandonment, which, believe me, also involves therapy and also involves, all kinds of things. Like, it's not just sit down and meditate. But it allowed for that healing, and it also opened up perception, right? Like, there were things I could see and experience that previously I hadn't been able to, such as compersion, right? The opposite of jealousy, enjoying seeing your partner fall in love or have a like really fun, sexual connection with someone and experience new relationship energy, right? Like, that wasn't an experience I was familiar with. Like, while I didn't want to be monogamous, I wanted you to be monogamous because I didn't want to deal with my jealousy. And the fact that I could experience compersion and like actually be happy for my partner, it's a whole new kind of emotion that I hadn't experienced before. So that's just one example.
How do you facilitate in yourself that balance of not letting seeing these emotions and acknowledging them within you, which I think is really important, and not stepping back so far that you are kind of numb to them or ignoring what they are trying to tell you?
Such an incredibly important question. Thank you for asking it. We would call that spiritual bypassing, using the techniques and the tools to be like, well, there's no separate solid self, so it doesn't matter what I do. And my human self can be suffering and wanting to die, and I can be causing all this, harm and like issues all around, but I am one with everything, so it doesn't matter, right? Like, not the way to do this, but it does happen. And also it happens that we bypass our own emotions. And I did a lot of that actually early in my journey. And I had to start checking in every single day. Am I bypassing anything? Am I using these spiritual tools and these awakenings that I've had to bypass my human experience? And after a while, it became a default to check in. And it hasn't happened for a while. Not to say other things don't happen, but that hasn't happened for a while. So one of the really important ingredients of not spiritually bypassing is to have teachers and peers and coaches, people who can recognize it in you and point it out, or can at least be like, okay, so at one point I was called Spock. And I went to my friend and I'm like, yeah, well, he said I was acting like Spock. And I mean, that's just, and she was like, well, do you think maybe you are acting a little like, do you think maybe you're actually avoiding your human experience? Yeah, I was. And so trusted people can be really helpful. And also not identifying with the spiritual self either. Not identifying with the sexually evolved self either. Like recognizing that these are all elements of you and none of them are that final landing place. And when we get attached, for example, if we get attached to the spiritually awakened self, then what happens when we have a really bad year, like I had a couple years ago, and we feel like we can't tell anyone because we're supposed to be so evolved, and I'm really grateful that I had teachers who really encouraged me to be transparent, to be authentic, so that when I was in this really dark place, I could get help and I could say I'm having a hard time and not feel like my ego was being dismantled because I was attached to being this person who didn't suffer or something like that. So it is really important. And when we're talking about deconstruction practices, working with self-love, self-compassion, as well as self-inquiry, and really getting into acceptance around all the different parts of self is so important, because we can't see through a solid self until we see that self.
You jumped right into the question that I wanted to ask, which is, are there any tools that you could give? So maybe I can ask this. Are there things or tools that you know now? Are there any additional tools that you know now that would have been helpful earlier in your journey, or just information in general?
Yeah, as far as non-monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And maybe how that intersects with your spiritual path.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is that it's not urgent, that it's okay to slow down, right? Like, because we can have new insight come in or new clarity come in about like what we want or who we see ourselves to be. And there can be this mad rush to like, I've got to do it. Like I've got to, go to every meditation retreat, or I've got to, get 5 new partners, whatever it is, and actually it's okay to slow down. And it's one of the first things that I say to clients when they're interested in exploring non-monogamy. I say, take it really nice and slow. Like, here, read these 5 books before you ever even make out with someone new. Like, I mean, not always, but it can be helpful. Just like put the brakes on, especially if you're wanting to practice non-monogamy because you just have a big crush on someone. And it's like, oh, I just think they're really hot, so I should be non-monogamous. It's like, well, maybe, or maybe just like slow down and see what happens if you feel into it for yourself. And if you start having conversations with your partner around what non-monogamy means, or partners. I mean, we can be monogamous with several people too. Like that's a version of monogamy / non-monogamy. So slowing down and assuming that more will be revealed. Like, because I remember like when I was first really consciously exploring non-monogamy, I was like, well, this is just who I am. It's who I've always been. It's who I am. And it's what I need. This is my truth. And as the years went by, I was like, yeah, I don't really identify with the idea of this being my truth. Like, yeah, it seems to be that this is how I'm wired, but I've had periods where I really want monogamy as well. And if I'm locked into this idea of this is who I'm supposed to be, then it's going to be hard to be flexible and fluid with what arises. And so slowing down is something that I could have used in the beginning, as well as remembering that I'm going to change. Like we're going to change. We're human beings.
Do you have any like advice or again tools to help people who are like, for a long time for me, I really struggled like stepping back from my emotions in the moment. And I think it can be really hard to have perspective when you're feeling like emotions can be so overwhelming and all encompassing. How do you, in those moments, step back and don't let that take over your actions or what you are doing in that moment? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the main tools that I find very, very helpful is the mindfulness of self practice, which is really what I've been describing around like looking at like, oh, there's this sensation in my body. There's these images in my mind. There's these words in my mind. And they are different strands of experience. And when I untangle them, they're not as overwhelming. Now, it can be challenging in the moment if you've never done that to just start doing it, right? Like, so it does require practice, and definitely for people who are, who are either embarking on non-monogamy or who are struggling in non-monogamy, this is a good daily practice to sit down and to just witness those experiences. So you're not trying to change them. You're not trying to quiet them. You're just noticing, oh, there's some mental talk, mental image. There's some emotional sensations, stepping back, sitting in sort of a witness space and watching that activity occur, which, then allows you the ability to detangle it in the moment. And when it's not tangled up, it's less likely that we're going to, act based on the thoughts and the emotions. And we're going to be able to see more clearly what the next right action would be if there is an action. And so that's a main practice that I like to offer folks. But along with that is self-compassion. It is so important. Even if you're the most non-monogamous person on the planet, stuff can come up. You can have tender feelings arise. And it's like to be able to be like, oh, sweetheart, this is really hard. Yeah, I'm right here with you. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere. I got you. It's like this right now. That's incredibly helpful for those moments, whether that's regarding non-monogamy or not, to be able to soothe yourself in that way and offer that compassion to yourself. And especially when it comes to areas of abandonment and trauma and neglect, which oftentimes, as I mentioned, are what's underneath of jealousy. It's really helpful to have that tool.
What about for your partners, like honing in on one partner at a time? So what about for your partner? Let's say that you do have these tools, these skills in your skill box. How can you help a partner that maybe doesn't?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'll say is we need to be radically honest and radically in consent. If you don't want to be in a non-monogamous relationship and you're forcing yourself to be in a non-monogamous relationship, it's probably not going to work. If you're being pressured to be in a non-monogamous relationship, probably not going to work. If you actually really do want to explore that, where that feels really authentic for you, but you're having trouble with it, great. Your partner can help you by being willing to have lots of conversations. That's what I always tell people. Like, you want to be non-monogamous, get ready for a lot of talks. You're going to be sitting down and having lots and lots of conversations. It can be helpful to have particular dialogue modalities to work with. I'm a fan of Imago dialogue, which was created by Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt. And it's just a structured dialogue, which can be really helpful for conflict. So if you're finding you're getting triggered during these conversations, using something like Imago can be really helpful, as well as having a practice of being able to go to a resource, being able to focus on something that feels good in your body or something external to allow for the intensity to move through while you're not being flooded by it. So tools like this can be really helpful. There is a great chapter in The Ethical Slut on jealousy. It's sort of like a classic text. I don't fully resonate with it. It feels a bit dated, but that chapter is really good. And it really breaks down like normalizes and breaks down, tools. A friend of mine, Dedeker Winston, she has a book called The Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory, and she's got lots of great resources in there as well. Tristan Taormino has Opening Up, which is full of great resources. So educating yourself and encouraging your partner to educate themselves is also really helpful. So you don't feel like you're just like alone with it. I remember when I was like going through the challenging period, I was online, like looking for, groups I could talk to. It was not as commonly discussed when this was going on for me. It's really expanded in the last couple of years. Not that it wasn't happening, but people are talking about it much more openly now. And then it was a little harder to find. So I was like, I need help. I need someone that understands. So education can be really helpful. I think the other thing you can do for a partner is have a lot of compassion and care and understanding. But if you've agreed to embark on this together, you also have to honor yourself. There have been times, in my relationship where one or the other has been like, I know this is hard for you, and I've had these plans for a week and I'm going to do them. And I love you, and we'll talk more about it when I get back. And so being able to set your own boundaries is really important as well.
Well, this has been wickedly insightful.
Yeah.
I, for one, have a lot more to think about. Jessica, I'd very much appreciate it if you could read your Carnal Theory for everyone's further pondering.
Absolutely. Sexuality, much like spirituality, is an infinite path of possibilities. When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting.
May all of you chew upon this.
I have a lot of, at once I feel like really invigorated and very at peace.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I am pretty sure, if you're similar to Abba and myself, that this episode has given you something to reflect upon. But we'd love for you to reach out with any questions or insights for us or for Jessica on our Instagram at Carnal Theory or at My Sex Bio. And check out Jessica's work on Instagram at Your Wild Awakening or at Jessica Clark Graham and at yourwildawakening.com. Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure.
Carnal Theory is produced by My Sex Bio, an educational platform empowering people like you to take command of your sexual biography. Our sound design is by David Usma and theme music by Min the Universe. Video editing is by David Usma, and our assistant video editor and marketing coordinator is Maria Taruque. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify at My Sex Bio. Visit our website and join our e-letter at mysexbio.org and support our work by joining our Patreon. Thank you.